40 here. Do you ever feel like the news is trying to manage you? I mean, it's just so strong that the news media wants us to hate Iran and to blame Iran for the Hamas attack on Israel. The news doesn't put much emphasis into conveying the Hamas point of view. All right, Hamas is the democratically elected representatives of the people of Gaza. Hamas overwhelmingly represents the people of Gaza far more than the Netanyahu government represents the people of Israel. So yeah, this is a democracy for all intents and purposes, not in its classical form, but in its essence. All right, this represents the will of the people. Hamas does. And they are fighting out of their hero system, just like I am live streaming out of my hero system, and you go to church and you worship out of your hero system. We have different hero systems. So you say, why can't the Arabs, why can't the Muslims make peace with this tiny little insignificant Jewish state in their midst? Well, why can't people who believe in heterosexual marriage make peace with the presence of a tiny number of same-sex couples in their midst? Because it violates their hero system that marriage should be between a man and a woman. And it violates the hero system for many to have homosexuals open and out and serving in the U.S. military. That violates a hero system. It violates a hero system, all right, to have, transgender becoming popular, all right? We're all driven, we're all motivated, we're all inspired and compelled and given strength and given, pain by damage done to our hero system. Frequently, we would rather be punched in the stomach or punched in the face than to suffer the trials and tribulations of the desecration of our hero system, whether our hero system revolves around Christianity or Judaism or the pursuit of, scientific truth or liberalism or conservatism or nationalism. We all have a hero system. And Muslims have a hero system, right? Part of their hero system is that the land currently occupied by the Jewish state of Israel belongs to them. And Arabs and Muslims do have a claim to the land historically, right? I don't have any interest in litigating who has the stronger claim to the land. That's largely a matter of faith. So I don't try to litigate matters of faith. But Muslims and Arabs have their reasons for believing that this land belongs to them. And their sense of self, their hero system is violated. It is desecrated. It is, damaged by the presence of a Jewish state on land that they believe belongs to them. And interesting what happened in Sydney, Australia. All right, so a particular group of Muslims got together, took over the area around the Sydney Opera House, right, the central business district of Sydney. And the Sydney police warned Jews to stay away from the central business district of Sydney. I mean, this is almost, unprecedented. I didn't know if this has happened before in Australia. It's hard to imagine happening in America. But for their own welfare, police told Jews, stay away from the central business district. And you had Palestinians gathering at the Sydney Opera House and, yelling, gas the Jews, kill the Jews, rejoicing in the slaughter of Jews. And, how on earth is Australia strengthened by the importation of this kind of dissension? Right? Now, I don't think for a second that, all Muslims support the slaughter of Jews, right? I don't believe that these Muslims who were at the Sydney Opera House causing, celebrating the mass slaughter of Jews and calling for more mass slaughter of Jews, by no means do I think that these Muslims are just inherent to Islam. They're not, right? But a particular set of Muslims is going to celebrate the slaughter of Jews, and a particular set of Jews is going to scream out death to the Arabs, right? It's not Ashkenazi Jews, by and large, who march through the streets of, cities in Israel, communities in Israel, screaming death to the Arabs, right? It's, by and large, disaffected, low-achieving Sephardic and Mizrahi Jews who do that. Now, I live in Los Angeles, and Los Angeles Orthodox Jews are pretty hardcore. I've been told by much wiser, more knowledgeable Los Angeles Orthodox Jews than myself that probably half of Los Angeles Orthodox Jewry believes that Baruch Goldstein is a hero, right? You can go, to the best of my knowledge, to every Torah bookstore in Los Angeles, and you can buy Baruch HaGever. It's probably one of their best sellers, celebrating the saintly, the righteous, the tzaddik, Baruch Goldstein. And why was he so righteous? Because he went into a mosque and just slaughtered as many Muslims at prayer as he could. And I would estimate that half of Los Angeles Orthodox Jews regard him as a great guy. Now, Orthodox Jews in Los Angeles and Orthodox Jews elsewhere in America are not going out and committing murder, and they're not going to, publicly call for the mass slaughter of Arabs and Muslims. But a lot of Israelis, really wish that the people of Gaza and the Palestinians would just disappear. Most of them are not going to go public with that wish, but everybody down deep has a significant part of themselves that wishes that those who are different from them, regards them simply as subhuman, right? People in Gaza think that way about Israeli Jews. The Palestinians on the West Bank, by and large, think that way about Israeli Jews. Israeli Jews, by and large, think that way under times of stress about people in Gaza and people in the West Bank. All right, this is just inherent to the human condition. All right, I made some notes. Oh, it's interesting. So New Yorker has a big profile on, glowing profile by and large, on the national security advisor for Joe Biden. And this guy, Jake Sullivan, he talks about the Russia-Ukraine war as good versus evil. I mean, it just seems like such incredibly naive language for someone who's got a sophisticated Ivy League education. Wow. But that is how, the dominant elites see things. I mean, do you feel like you're being stage managed when you watch the news, read the news, listen to the news? We're supposed to loathe Russia, so much so that we're itching to go to war with Russia. The media is managing it so that we loathe China and are itching to go to war with China over Taiwan, even though Taiwan can't be bothered to put much effort into defending itself. And we're expected to encourage to loathe Iran, to blame Iran for what Hamas did in southern Israel this weekend, so that there is American support for going to war with Iran. Like substantial parts of the Pundit industrial complex, of the foreign policy complex, of the American news media longs for America to go to war with Russia, China, and Iran simultaneously, which would be an absolute disaster, right? And at the same time, they tell us that democracies don't declare war on other democracies. And it's just not true. All right, Hamas represents the democratic will of the Gazan people. All right, more than the Netanyahu government represents the Israeli people. All right, Hamas is far more popular with Gazans than Bibi Netanyahu and his governing coalition are with Israelis. Right, and when democracies go to war, right, they are not more moral, not more sensitive to civilian deaths than non-democracies. Right, about 500,000 to 1 million Iraqi children died in the 1990s because of American sanctions against Iraq. Right, it was horrifying to look at the video and the pictures of the dozens, possibly hundreds of Israeli children who were slaughtered by Hamas. Well, about 1 million Iraqi children were killed by American sanctions. But by and large, you didn't have TV cameras capturing those deaths. All right, that wasn't, brought to the American people's attention because by and large, Americans don't really care about the death and suffering of non-Americans. Just like Australians, by and large, don't care that much about the death and suffering of non-Australians. And the French, by and large, don't care much about the death and suffering of non-French. And Germans, by and large, don't care about the death and suffering of non-Germans, right? That's reality. You want to do good in the world, you have to recognize reality. Now, contrary to this Wall Street Journal report, which came out very quickly, very conveniently, saying that Iran was behind these attacks on Israel by Hamas, right? Both America and Israeli government have stated there is absolutely no evidence that Iran ordered these attacks. Right? Iran has yet to attack Americans in America. So I'm sure Iran has hit squads in this country who will go to work if America directly attacks Iran. The Obama administration reached the best possible deal with Iran. Iran can go nuclear essentially any times at once. It's a shame to me that Trump repudiated it. The Republican argument and the media argument the Biden administration played a significant role in the Hamas attack by returning $6 billion of frozen Iranian assets to Iran is absurd. All right? Iran has been allowing in nuclear inspectors. They've reduced uranium enrichment. They've released American hostages. They've indicated openness to direct negotiations and engagement with America through the country of Oman. Right? Iran is not on a trajectory to order these attacks. Man, so much to talk about, but this idea that democracies are just so much more moral than non-democracies when it comes to war is absurd. But the one thing I don't see in the news media is the significant role that Russia likely played in these attacks. That doesn't seem to get any attention. Right? I am skeptical that these likely Hamas attacks would have occurred, right, if America was not so deeply involved, so balls deep in Ukraine, funding, supplying, encouraging, and directing this proxy war against Russia by NATO that is taking place in Ukraine. Right? Ukrainians are dying, right, because the U.S. thinks it's a great idea to have a proxy war with Russia. And this attack on Israel, I don't think would have occurred if Russia had not been highly incentivized to get back at America. Russia's getting back at America by encouraging, directing, helping this Hamas attack against Israel, right? Just like Russia encouraged the Azerbaijan attack on Armenia and taking of Nagorno-Karabakh, Russia is highly incentivized to create as much global trouble for America as possible because America is creating so much tsuris, so much trouble for Russia. John Mearsheimer says that this decision by the Biden administration to be so supportive of Ukraine and supply tens of billions of dollars and encourage a proxy war in Ukraine is 10 times the disaster of our 2003 invasion of Iraq, right? It's essentially 10 times the disaster of our 2001 invasion of Afghanistan and our 2003 invasion of Iraq, right? Which together cost approximately up to about $7 trillion, right? We blew $7 trillion in these pointless, disastrous invasions. All right, the invasion of Iraq in 2003 cost about 1 million Iraqi lives. Right? I'm horrified, just like you are, by these pictures of the Hamas slaughter of about 1,000 Israelis. All right, the American invasion of Iraq cost 1 million American lives. Before that, American sanctions against Iraq cost about 1 million Iraqi children's lives in the 1990s. Oh. So this idea that democracies are just so much more moral in the way they wage war, it's ludicrous. All the evidence is against it. Yeah, great article in Ynet. Hands that push Hamas attack forward are in Moscow, right? This is instability created by an attack on Israel. It is intended to pull U.S. attention and resources away from the war in Ukraine, right? Which is exactly what it is doing. But the media doesn't let you know that it's Russia that played a very significant role in this Hamas attack, that their interests are far more served by the Hamas attack than Iran's, right? Who benefits from the Hamas attack on Israel? Moscow. Russia benefits far more than does Iran. I'm not at all sure that Iran benefits at all. Moscow benefits. Russia benefits. Putin benefits, just as he benefits from Azerbaijan, a Muslim nation, thrashing Armenia and taking over Nagorno-Karabakh, and Putin will be fomenting more of these. And we've brought it on ourselves by our boneheaded, stupid, ridiculous, ludicrous, just awful decision to essentially get into a proxy war with Russia versus NATO over Ukraine. All right, if Trump had been re-elected, Putin would never have been incentivized to mount this invasion of Ukraine. So why not here? Instability created in places like Serbia, Kosovo, West Africa, Azerbaijan, Armenia, Nagorno-Karabakh, and now Israel, all intended to pull U.S. attention and resources away from the war in Ukraine, and it's doing that. It's doing exactly that. Right? Putin is not an idiot. Right? He has idiotic tendencies, just like we all have idiotic tendencies. He miscalculates. He makes mistakes. Right? But overall, he's not an idiot. He is creating conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia, Serbia and Kosovo, creating conflict in West Africa, now in Israel, and he's pulling U.S. attention away from the war in Ukraine. Right? U.S. recently withdrew millions of dollars of munitions stored in Israel, gave them to Ukraine. Now, the U.S. is going to have to take these munitions and send them to Israel. So they're not going to be able to be available to the Ukrainians to fight back against Russia. Right? Russia used Iran to supply large numbers of drones to attack Ukrainian civilians. It's now using Iran to encourage and enable these attacks in Israel. So the governing consensus, all right, the way we're being stage managed by the news and by our elites is to believe that if only liberal norms prevailed, right, if only we had, widespread human rights and democracy, we wouldn't have, these awful things. Well, John Mearsheimer read a great book about this in 2018, The Great Delusion, Liberal Dreams and International Realities. Right, so there is a governing consensus in the news media and among our elites that liberal democracies fight wars in especially virtuous ways. It's ridiculous. There's no evidence for this. Right? Liberalism places great stress on inalienable human rights. So yeah, you'd expect liberal democracies to go to lengths to avoid killing civilians. Right? But when you study it, you find democracies are more likely than non-democracies to target civilians. The way the United States fights its war, it has killed millions of civilians, many of them on purpose. Right, yeah, autocracies are more likely than democracies to abuse prisoners of war, but plenty of evidence that democracies widespread mistreat their prisoners. Right? When democratic states get desperate, they quickly forget the enemy's humanity, begin to value human rights far less. Israeli rhetoric is that Hamas are animals. Right? Israel is a democracy, in many ways a liberal democracy. Right? When foreigners murder Americans, there's much greater concern to the average American than when foreigners murder each other. And it's that way universally. Australians don't really care when non-Australians murder each other. Right? There was a great hue and cry in the United States when the Islamic State, ISIS, beheaded 2 American journalists in 2014. That persuaded President Obama to go to war against ISIS. Right? Americans cared about the deaths of their fellow Americans. They didn't care nearly so much when ISIS slaughtered thousands of Muslims. Americans who murder foreigners, especially non-white foreigners, don't get treated very harshly. Lieutenant William Cowley, who directed the My Lai massacre in Vietnam in March 1968, served 3.5 years under house arrest before he was freed. He enjoyed overwhelming support from the public, even after his role in the massacre was revealed in the media. Nobody else in his unit was convicted of a criminal offense, even though Americans slaughtered somewhere between 350 and 500 civilians, mostly women and children. Now, if they had butchered that number of unarmed Americans, they would not have received such benevolent treatment. Americans are extremely sensitive to American casualties. Right? Israelis are extremely sensitive to Israeli casualties. Australians extremely sensitive to Australian casualties. But your normal member of a nation doesn't care much about the casualties of outgroups. One scholar, John Tierman, done a major study on this subject, concurs one of the most remarkable aspects of American wars is how little we discuss the victims who are not Americans. All nations think this way. The United States has fought 7 wars since the Cold War ended. The United States is addicted to war. Right? It's a liberal democracy. Britain and Australia, by and large, have been at America's side through these wars. More liberal democracies. So democratic peoples frequently start wars. Wars are frequently good politics. And the public in a democratic nation like the United States, Australia, Britain, frequently does not pay a big price when its country goes to war. Wealthy countries get to have highly capitalized militaries, wherein only a small slice of the population actually serves and volunteers, and liberal democracies can wage war in ways that minimize their own casualties. Right, what about all this cumbersome decision-making that holds democracies back from going to war? Well, essentially, the President of the United States or any executive can usually plunge his nation very quickly into war. Right? These checks and balances may sometimes make it a little bit difficult to start a war. But democracies initiate wars all the time, like the 2001 invasion of Afghanistan, the 2003 invasion of Iraq. Right? Very rarely do checks and balances and democratic inefficiencies prevent governing elites from taking their country to war. Right? All these institutional impediments do not thwart democratic leaders bent on starting a war, even if the war, is a disaster, like the invasions of Afghanistan and Iraq. Right? In emergencies, liberal democracies such as Israel, United States, Australia, England, fully capable of reacting swiftly and decisively and initiating a war. Right. This is the latest New Yorker.
Written by Susan B. Glasser. Read by Julia Whalen. On a Monday afternoon in August, when President Joe Biden was on vacation and the West Wing felt like a ghost town, his national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, sat down to discuss America's involvement in the war in Ukraine. Sullivan had agreed to an interview with trepidation, as he had told me, but now, in the White House's Roosevelt Room, steps from the Oval Office, he seemed surprisingly relaxed for a congenital worrier. "It's my job to worry," he once told an interviewer, "so I worry about literally everything." When I asked about reports that at a recent NATO summit he had been furious during negotiations over whether to issue Ukraine a formal invitation to join the Western Alliance, he said, only half-jokingly, "First of all, I'm like the most rational human being on the planet." But when it came to the subject of the war itself and why Biden has staked so much,
rational being on the planet, could very well plunge us into the war that ends human life on this planet. Very well plunge us into a conflict with Russia. But the Biden administration just seems competent because they, by and large, members of his administration are cohesive. They don't leak against each other. Their conflicts don't spill out into the open. So the media keeps telling us how competent they are. They're going to competently, advance us into a catastrophe 10 times the size of the invasion of Iraq in 2003.
On helping Ukraine fight it, Sullivan struck an unusually impassioned note. "As a child of the 80s and Rocky and Red Dawn, I believe in freedom fighters, and I believe in righteous causes, and I believe the Ukrainians have one," he said. "There are very few conflicts that I have seen, maybe none, in the post-Cold War era where there's such a clear good guy and bad guy. And we're on the side of the good guy."
Wow. I mean, I sure, morally you can make that case, but wars are not fought and sustained and decided primarily on the basis of morality. Morality, if it is to be objective, right, depends upon a subjective leap of faith to some sort of transcendent source of morality. All right. I doubt that Jake Sullivan's a religious man. I doubt he accepts that the source of morality is God. So therefore, his description of this war as, good versus evil is irrational because there's no objective basis on which to make such a pronouncement unless you have and share some kind of transcendent source of morality, or you have our opinions on morality.
And we have to do a lot for that person. There's no question that the United States has done a lot. American assistance to Ukraine, totaling $76 billion, with more than $43 billion for security aid, is the largest such effort since the Second World.
Okay, so asking for a friend, what is your favorite Sunni civilization? Is it Hamas? Like, what would you like to pattern America on? What is your favorite Sunni civilization? Is it Saudi Arabia? Hey, where do you see a Sunni civilization that you really want to imitate?
World War. In the aftermath of the February 24, 2022 Russian invasion, the U.S. has delivered more than 2,000 Stinger anti-aircraft missiles, more than 10,000 Javelin anti-tank weapons, and more than 2 million 155mm artillery rounds. It has sent Patriot missiles for air defense and high-mobility artillery rocket systems, known as HIMARS, to give Ukraine longer-range strike capability. Sophisticated ghost drones and small hand.
So, as I mentioned, Australian Jews were told to stay away from the central business district of Sydney because bloodthirsty Muslims were celebrating the Hamas slaughter of Israelis and calling for more of the same and gassing the Jews. And again, I make clear this is not inherent to Muslims. This is a particular set of Muslims that Australia has imported a particular set of Muslims, and you can identify them. All right, Muslims from certain countries are far more likely to be bloodthirsty and to welcome genocide than Muslims from other countries, just like certain Jews far more likely to scream death to the Arabs than other Jews. 95% of American Jews do not regard Baruch Goldstein, right, the guy who went into a mosque and slaughtered 30-plus Muslims at prayer, as a hero. But a tiny percentage do. And you can identify them. Probably half of Los Angeles Orthodox Jews regard Baruch Goldstein as a hero.
And launched Puma drones, Stryker armored personnel carriers, Bradley fighting vehicles, and M1A1 Abrams tanks. Biden has framed the conflict in sweeping, nearly civilizational terms.
So human rights is, the favorite preoccupation of our ruling elites, of our academic elites, our political elites, our media elites. And human rights really developed as a prominent, article of faith among our elites only in the 1970s after the failure of Marxist politics, right? After communism and socialism really didn't work out, lefties looked for something else to invest themselves in, and they developed this notion of universal human rights. Now, prior to the 1970s, essentially, human rights were understood to be something that only a nation state could grant to its citizens, really. So there's no real meaning to human rights outside of what a nation state at a particular time in a particular place can grant its citizens. But it is a preoccupation of people who live in an abstract world. I largely live in an abstract world. I get living in an abstract world. I've lived much of my life in an abstract world. I love the abstract world. I frequently spend, way too much time in an abstract world when I'd be much better served, spending time interacting with real people. But I'm a reasonably smart guy. I like to read books and think in abstract terms. When you live in an abstract world, it's very easy to live in a substantial amount of delusion. I have spent a substantial amount of my life in delusion. My therapist said to me, "I'd hate to see you waste your life in delusion." She said that because he saw me wasting much of my life in delusion. I had another therapist say to me, "I'd hate to see you wind up as that guy on the bar stool talking about, what a contender he could have been." So this notion that there are universal human rights and this is, a righteous cause to fight for, it does virtually no good in the world. It's a delusion. It's something that makes you feel good. The only meaningful definition, understanding of human rights is that the human rights are the human rights that can be conveyed by a nation state to its citizens. That's it.
Vowing to stick with Ukraine for as long as it takes to defeat the invaders, who, despite an estimated 120,000 dead and 180,000 injured.
So are Hamas the invaders? Right? Arabs and Muslims can make, a strong case that the Zionists are the invaders. And Zionists can make a strong case that the Arabs and Muslims and Hamas are the invaders, right? No people spring out of the ground, right? Nobody is owed any territory on earth unless you look at things through the eyes of faith, right? The only territory that your people get is the territory that your people can seize and defend, right? Israel does not belong to the Jews unless you look at it through the eyes of faith. I look at it through the eyes of faith. So I'm down with saying Israel belongs to the Jews, but I'm admitting that I am making a leap of faith. Just like Arabs and Muslims can make a leap of faith that the current land of the Jewish state of Israel belongs to Islam. Right? No people emerge straight out of the ground and have, an inherent right to a particular plot of land, right? The only right you have to any land is the land that your people can seize and that your people can defend.
Still hold nearly 20% of the country's territory. But at nearly every stage, the administration has faced sharp questions about the nature and the durability of the U.S. commitment.
I mean, remember President Lyndon Baines Johnson in the Vietnam War? He would decide on a case-by-case basis where American planes could bomb in North Vietnam. He would personally select many of the bombing targets. And the Biden administration is similarly trying to manage the Ukraine war, the proxy war fought in Ukraine between NATO and Russia, by giving certain weapons to Ukraine, but then saying, oh, but you can't use these inside of Russia, right? As though you can give weapons to a country fighting for its survival and then effectively limit how it uses its weapons. I mean, how delusional is that? The Biden administration thinks it can stage manage how the weapons it gives Ukraine are used. Good luck.
Beyond the inevitable tensions with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, there are jostling Washington bureaucracies, restive European allies, and a growing Trumpist faction in the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, which is opposed to the bipartisan congressional bills that have, up until now, funded the war. A vocal peace camp, meanwhile, is demanding negotiations with Vladimir Putin to end the conflict, even as Secretary of State Antony Blinken has said there is currently little prospect for meaningful diplomacy. The task of leading the White House through such treacherous politics has fallen to Sullivan, who, when he...
Wow, well, if Antony Blinken says that there's, little meaningful opportunity for negotiation, I mean, then that just answers that. I mean, if our Secretary of State makes such a pronouncement, like, who are we to question him? I mean, it's just settled then. Yeah, apparently 20 Americans missing in Israel. Guys, we need to bomb Iran, bomb Iran, and go to war with Russia and go to war with China. Oh, crazy how the American news media is trying to stage manage what's going on to avoid the bleeding obvious that this attack on Israel likely would not have happened if America hadn't been so balls deep in Ukraine. That Taiwan can't be bothered to put much effort into defending itself, and yet tens of thousands of Americans must die to defend a country that can't be bothered to defend itself. And that Iran are the bad guys here, that Hamas, a Sunni organization, is, according to much of the news media, essentially a proxy for the Shiite regime in Iran.
He was appointed at the age of 44, was the youngest national security advisor since McGeorge Bundy held the job during the Vietnam War. It's really Jake, Ivo Dalder, a former U.S. ambassador to NATO who has consulted regularly with the National Security Council since the Russian invasion, told me. He's the quartermaster of the war, and everything else. Sullivan is lean, with wispy blonde hair, a tendency to blush bright red, and a workaholic intensity unusual even by Washington standards. One night a few months ago, Sullivan discovered an intruder who had broken into his home at around 3 a.m. because he was still up working. In his office, there is a chart, updated frequently, showing countries' current stocks of ammunition that might go to Ukraine. This spring, during the Battle of Bakhmut, he knew the status of the fighting down to the city block.
Wow, that's amazing. Isn't that fantastic? The National Security Advisor knows the status of the fighting in Ukraine down to the block. I'm kind of naive. I wish that he was up on American interests. I am not as interested in the fighting in Ukraine, block by block, as I am in what's good for America. So Hamas and the Palestinians can make a powerful case for their own victimhood Israelis can make a powerful case for their own victimhood. I can make a powerful case for my own victimhood. You can make a powerful case for your own victimhood, right? Or group identity depends upon a strong sense of grievance and victimhood. Every people can feel terribly, terribly oppressed, and it's absolutely essential for group identity. Now, I know what you think. You're saying, 40, stop with the blather, get to the point. What does Peter Zion have to say about all this?
Zion here, coming to you from Central Texas. It is the
Hi,
7th
Peter.
of October, and the news today is that in the early hours of today, Hamas, the political/terror group based on your politics that controls the southern enclave of Gaza in southern Israel, launched an attack into Israel proper, demolishing a little bit of the border, land, sea, paraglider attacks, and literally thousands of missiles. And so far, they've kidnapped at least several dozen civilians and a handful of soldiers and took them back to Gaza with them. Netanyahu.
So do you think Peter Zion is going to go into the JQ? I don't remember Peter Zion delving into the mysteries of the JQ. He doesn't talk much about Israel and the Israel lobby. I wonder why.
Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has declared war on Hamas, and military operations are forthcoming. It's a very hot situation on the ground, very fluid. Don't have a lot of information for you there, and honestly, there's people who are much better at that than I am. What I can tell you is there's two kind of things that kind of stand out that we need to watch here. Number one, within minutes of the news being reported, the Ukrainian government offered its support to the Israeli government.
Oh, wow. That must be such a relief to the people of Israel that the Ukrainian government had offered its support. Woo! What a relief. I mean, the people of Israel must feel so warm, so nurtured, so safe, so reassured, so heartened, so strengthened, so inspired, so transcendently, supernally, eternally, terrifically fantastic that the Ukrainian government has offered its support. Wow, this is a game changer. And Hamas was shaking in its boots that Ukraine had offered Israel its support. And I'm just looking at the chat right now. Laponius Maximus Meridius, I want you to know I'm offering you my support. Cyberview, I am offering you my support. Azian Sultan Bekov, I want you to know that I'm extending to you my support and my love. Now, I won't send you even $1, but I'm offering you my support. Glib Medley, you too get my support. Elliot Blatt, you have my support, bro. Everybody who's watching the show right now, all 20 of you, right? 16 on YouTube and a few on Rumble and maybe one on Twitter. I'm offering you my support. And my support, it should mean as much to you as the support of Ukraine means to Israel. And you know how the Israelis, they're just smitten right now. They are devastated. They feel so bad that Ukraine immediately offered Israel their support during Israel's time of suffering, while Israel had not offered the same support to Ukraine when Ukraine was suffering. The Israelis are just torn up inside. They're bleeding inside. They're crying inside. They're ripped up inside.
In defending against the assault, which is far more than the Israelis have offered to the Ukrainians in response to the Russian invasion. The Ukrainians have been a little annoyed with the Israelis trying to sit on the fence.
You know why the Israelis sat on the fence? Because they didn't want to provoke exactly what happened. Right? Russia is an incredibly dangerous enemy. You don't gratuitously, needlessly make dangerous enemies. And if that means you don't get to be as moral, you don't need to immediately, go to the aid of the suffering because you put a higher priority on your own welfare than the welfare of strangers half a world away, that's what you do. Israel was absolutely right to be highly reluctant to side with Ukraine. If the United States had been highly reluctant to side with Ukraine, we would not be on the verge of World War III. We would not be on the verge, we are stuck in a massive catastrophe in this conflict with Russia that there's no way out of. Right? This is going to be 10 times more damaging to America's interests than the stupid invasions of Afghanistan in 2001, invasion of Iraq in 2003. If only America had been this reluctant, right, then there would have been, in all likelihood, no attack by Hamas on southern Israel this weekend.
For their part, have a population that's roughly 1/6 Russian, and so they've been trying to not get involved as much as they can, because they're always trying to keep their lines of communication open to the Russians as a way to manipulate events in the Arab world. It's going to be very interesting to see if this changes the mindset of folks in Israel at all, because for them, dealing with groups like Hamas is kind of an existential issue. And for Ukraine to come down so quickly and so publicly on their side is definitely noteworthy. There is no direct...
Noteworthy. Why? Right, Ukraine can do absolutely nothing for Israel. Why exactly is it noteworthy? It's noteworthy to Peter Zion, who thinks it's just so important that the United States, back Ukraine to the hilt, and that Putin is just like Hitler. And yeah, to Peter Zion is noteworthy. I don't think to any thoughtful analyst of world affairs that Ukrainian support for Israel is particularly noteworthy. I mean, I assume that Bolivia supports Israel too, and New Zealand during this time of pain and suffering, and that makes bupkis difference to Israel.
Indication of Russian involvement here, but there are a lot of tactics that are very familiar that we've seen. The Hamas group has actually shared footage of some of its attacks, including attacks on civilian targets, which, under normal circumstances would be considered a war crime pretty much anywhere, but the rules in the Middle East are a little odd. And we know that the senior leadership...
There are no meaningful rules in war, all right? War means that usually there is such an intense clash of interests that people are willing to kill over them. They're willing to kill because they believe that the survival of their own people is at stake. And in such situations, there really aren't any rules.
Of Hamas has been in and out of Moscow quite a bit over the course of the last year. So it's going to be interesting to see how that whole dynamic changes politically. Second aspect is political strategic as well. And that is that the Saudis and the Israelis have been hip deep in negotiations on a normalization program. Right now, most of the countries of the Arab world still don't recognize Israel as an independent state and entity. That has broken a little bit under the Trump administration, with Morocco and the United Arab Emirates switching sides. But now the question is whether the Biden administration gets Saudi Arabia to switch sides. And the debate, of course, is about the Palestinians. They're not between the Saudis and the Israelis, but among the Saudis. There's a debate going on within Saudi Arabia itself that's generational over whether or not they should just ditch the Palestinians completely, normalize relations with the Israelis, and just move on.
Yeah, I've emailed Mike Benz, aka Frame Game Radio. Have not heard back from him.
The older generation of the king, who's probably senile at this point, wants to continue to back the Palestinians, whereas the younger one, ruled by the crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman, really doesn't care at all. So we're going to find out really quickly here who actually holds power in Riyadh. And that is going to have any number of implications, because whenever the world's largest oil producer and exporter decides to change its political stance on regional affairs and starts backing it up with money, oil, and military power, a lot of interesting things can break through very quickly. So watch Jerusalem.
Is this the once-a-decade cutting of the grass where Israel goes into Gaza and kills off some of the most militant? Perhaps, I have no idea. A full-fledged ground invasion and takeover of Gaza by Israel may very well precipitate an attack on Israel by Hezbollah, which would very well kill 10,000 Israelis in the first 24 hours and flatten much of Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. Right, back to this New Yorker article on Jake Sullivan. Inside the White House's battle to keep Ukraine in the fight.
He often speaks with his counterpart in Kiev, Zelensky's chief of staff Andriy Yermak, 2 or 3 times a week, and has taken charge of everything from lobbying South Korea for artillery shells to running an emergency operation to get Ukraine additional power generators. Earlier this year, when Germany balked at sending Leopard tanks to Ukraine, Sullivan spent days in intensive talks with the German National Security Advisor to secure them.
Thank you, Jake Sullivan, for all that you do. Here's another premier intellectual, Big Alaska.
And I'm just struggling, man. I'm like, no matter how much I sleep, I'm just exhausted every day, all day. Like, just want to die, bad. It's not good.
Well, if you get a good night's rest tonight, you might reevaluate in the morning.
I can try, but it's just it's like the fucking forest is like I'm getting dizzy. I think I'm like sick, possibly. I might need to probably go back to the chiropractor tomorrow. I have no energy. Maybe I could reevaluate if I don't even know if I can do this house cam. I feel like I'm too old for this shit. Like, I don't know.
Oh, that's another topic too. But I mean, you know, we talked about in advance, like, in the real world, aside from the challenge, you know, streaming hasn't been profitable in a while.
Well, yeah, I'm not like,
so I mean,
like if this is like, I'm just being honest. Like, what's up? I don't even know what the chat's saying. What's up, chat? Well, like, let's just get really real. If this is what I need to, sorry. If I need to do 30 days 24/7 in order to stay relevant, I'd honestly just rather do other shit. Like, this is like too much for me, bro. Like, I'm not being Princess Alaska, but it's just like,
well, nobody's called you Princess Alaska.
No. I never said they did, but I'm just saying that. Like, if this is what like the streaming career looks like I'm just really not interested. Like, it's just not. This is not fun. I'm not enjoying. Like, I had some fun in some of the streams we did, but eventually I gotta get some rest. And I'm not getting real rest when I'm doing sleep streams every night, even if the lights are off.
Wow. Sounds like Baked Alaska's really struggling. Thoughts and prayers to Baked Alaska. We will not see his like again.
In exchange, the U.S. agreed to provide M1A1 Abrams tanks, a move that the Pentagon had long opposed. The NSC, in other words, has gone operational, with Sullivan personally overseeing the effort while also doing the rest of his job, which in recent months has taken him to secret meetings with a top Chinese official in Vienna and Malta and to complicated negotiations in the Middle East. In contrast to the epic feuds between George W. Bush's Pentagon and the State Department over Iraq, or the vicious infighting in Donald Trump's turnover-ridden national security team, the Biden White House's approach to the war has been notably drama-free. Disagreements among advisers, while at times robust and protracted, have barely surfaced in the press. Blinken, a confidant of Biden for more than 2 decades, has been perhaps the most visible salesman for the administration's strategy and a key conduit to European allies. Lloyd Austin, the congenial and low
It sounds like such wonderful people. Okay, Richard Hanania tweets, pretty sure if you gave me a year, I could write Shakespeare-quality work. Like if someone hadn't read all of Shakespeare and you randomly gave them me or him, on average, they couldn't tell the difference. Steve Saylor responds, Richard, I warned you about the ego thing. Richard Hanania responds, it's not about me. I think a lot of people could do it. I think literary quality ratings are based on fake prestige. Richard Hanania, all right, he believes that he can write on a Shakespeare level, and yet this delusional man, Richard Hanania, far more in reality than Frame Game Radio. Right, when Richard Hanania's work as a white nationalist writing under a pseudonym, when it came out, he made a quite convincing apology, right? He said, look, I've grown since then. Why I used to suck and hopefully no longer do. My road to small L liberalism, right? That's Richard Hanania. But Frame Game Radio, he made a ludicrous defense when his past came out. So this is Mike Benz, formerly Frame Game Radio, says, I am a Jew. I am a proud Jew. I am the descendant of Holocaust survivors who fled Poland. I was bar mitzvahed, and not just bar mitzvahed. I did the additional 4 years of Hebrew school to get confirmed. Meaning I went to Hebrew school until I was 17 years old. My Hebrew name is Moshe, and my rabbi would reiterate to me that name means messenger. Moshe does not mean messenger. Frame Game Okay, Mike Benz always had a meager understanding of things Jewish and Judaism. Then Frame Game Mike Benz writes, I'm telling you this because one of the most notoriously unethical hit piece journalists in the entire country, Brandy Zadrozny, who is famous for constantly getting her stories wrong, just tried to write a hit piece on me that is literal 180-degree opposite of what she wrote and what she thinks she found. Look, there's just no evidence that Brandy Zadrozny of NBC News is notorious, that she's particularly unethical, that she is not famous for constantly getting her stories wrong, or NBC and Brandy would be sued into oblivion. And if what Mike Benz is saying is true, then he should sue her, but he's not suing her because what she wrote about him was accurate. Now, I think that she skipped out on the contributions of Frame Game Radio, right? He said some impolitic and ill-advised and ill-judged things, but he also said some true and brave and funny things, right? He's a mixed bag, as we all were. Frame Game Radio was my favorite guest because he was just the most stimulating guest that I had on in 2018. So Frame Game, Mike Benz writes, Brandy's entire industry beat disinformation is getting totally crushed right now by work I've contributed to on multiple fronts, legal, regulatory, policy, media, and she clumsily must have thought she found something that can shoot one of the leading messengers on internet freedom with an unrelated attack related to anti-Semitism. Not very convincing response here by Frame Game. So he claims that Frame Game Radio was a project by Jews to get people who hated Jews to stop hating Jews. All right, I never once got a sense during Frame Game Radio's online career that it was a group project. I only got the sense it was an individual project. And it was not a de-radicalization project, right? It may well have de-radicalized some people and radicalized other people. Now, I really enjoyed Frame Game Radio. I think there are important criticisms to make of Frame Game Radio, so it's not like, I just think he was just, objectively wonderful. I had plenty of disagreements with Frame Game Radio back in the day. Had, disagreements as the years go by, but he was stimulating. He did some good things. He did some dumb things. He did some bad things. So Frame Game says, I have no non-Jews who write in to say, I'm so glad I found this account. I used to have a lot of hate towards Jews, but since I discovered you, I don't feel that anymore. I'm sure that's true for some people, and Mike Benz is most likely to hear from those people. Other people, very well may have been, radicalized by Frame Game. The biggest antagonists of this account, Frame Game, were people complaining their followers are becoming less radical, less willing to blame their problems on Jews. I'm extremely proud of this. In another life, this thing I was briefly a part of in 2016 and 2017. He was a part of this into the middle of 2018. We would be getting National Science Foundation funds for combating anti-Semitism. I would not participate today. I do not endorse participating in something like this in a general sense. It was a creature of a bizarre and volatile time in early 2016, which fellow conservative Jews were facing rising sentiments of anti-Semitism on our right. Well, yeah, everything takes place in a particular context. So the context of 2016 is different from the context of 2017 and from 2018. So I did not find Mike Benz's response very strong. I can't believe that Richard Hanania, right, had a more convincing response than Frame Game Radio, aka Mike Benz.
It's, I don't know how much is a revelation other than this idea of like the network of people. Like, so what he's basically saying is like there was a secret cabal of Jews manipulating political discourse for their benefit.
Which, before you get into this dimension, I'm not sure this is a doxing, because like one thing he.
I mean, what's the evidence that Frame Game Radio was a network of Jews? I can recall no evidence that Frame Game Radio was, a network of Jews. All evidence, everything I remember about the account was that it was the work of one individual. I can't recall anything about Frame Game Radio that was any kind of joint account. It seemed overwhelmingly obvious it was the work of one man. This is Ricardo and Dooovid from yesterday.
He disappeared years ago, and he's a known personality. He's bigger than his sub-internet. This is like comparable, I guess, to the Richard Hanania, if you call that doxing. And since he disappeared, he was a mainstream personality that was active in politics. He has 100,000 followers on Twitter. If you're talking like you or Steven that isn't really a known personality and maybe said a few controversial things, and then you get doxxed and like you lose your job, or people like, oh my God, do you hear what this guy was saying? As opposed to someone that's already a known personality.
Okay, I want to say something positive about Dooovid. He frequently comes out with perspectives that I would not have thought of, and I didn't really think of this perspective.
That was using in a non-account to say more controversial thing. It's still a form of doxing.
Why did the Halsey bucks stop flowing? Because Halsey could not afford to dole out those bucks anymore. I assume that he had business setbacks. Now, was someone subsidizing Halsey English? I have no awareness or knowledge of that. I don't consider that impossible to believe. All right, a lot going on in the chat. Luke, that whole fighting anti-Semitism thing was so disappointing. Like Mike Benz felt lying and deceiving people is okay somehow if he did it to fight anti-Semitism. Who is he? Borat. Gaza has 2 states, rubble, pre-rubble. Okay, put your helmet on. We might have a world war. So yeah, why did the Halsey bucks stop flowing? I think because of business setbacks. I would assume that Halsey had, so that he couldn't keep the bucks flowing. But yeah, it's entirely possible that maybe he was a conduit for some, right-wing Jewish money.
But I think it's a much weaker form, and it's a much more expected. Like if someone came in like, oh, I found out who you are, and you should be more careful, versus someone that is already well-known and is using it in a non-thing to say something a little bit more controversial than what the... And
Dooovid says in the chat that Richard Spencer doxed Frame Game in a Countercurrents article in 2018. I was not aware of that. I think I vaguely remember Ricardo saying that he was, aware of Frame Game Radio and his new iteration over the past 4 years. So, yeah, in many ways, Dooovid is a more astute observer of reality than I am. In other areas, Ricardo is a more astute observer of reality than I am. In some ways, maybe I'm a more astute observer of some parts of reality than Dooovid and Ricardo. Like, different people, different streamers have different gifts.
They're saying in their known media persona.
Sure. Look, we can excuse the fact that we want to talk about it, but
Right, this discussion took place on the suddenly lit Stephen J. James channel.
He's owned it either way. He's owned it. He said he directed us to look at the article with this post on Twitter. Shall I just read a little bit about it?
Sure. And even Brundle coming back and saying he knew about it 4 years ago, and just saying the information was irrelevant. I mean, you get back to it, but it's like, even like to this point, it's his doxing is basically irrelevant. It's like, oh, he used to say racist things years ago, or whatever the claim is under an Anon account. And it's just that we happen to know him and speak with him. But I think
I talked to him. I talked to him.
Me Too type thing, like, oh, this guy. I mean, Richard Hanania at best, comparable. This guy.
So I've had very few private conversations with people on the air. I've had some with Ricardo, but I don't think I've ever had any extensive private conversation with Dooovid. I've never had any extensive private conversations with the Frame Game. I've had a couple, brief ones with Halsey English, but pretty much most of my dissident right-wing conversations have taken place live on stream. And then I go back to my regular life, and I don't think I have anyone from the dissident right in my real life.
5 years ago, used to say controversial stuff under a non-account.
Yeah, I just wanted to be clear, though, that if I'd have found this on an Antifa site or something like that, dug this up on the internet, and it was...
Look, Frame Game was a player in a public space. This was not doxing, literally. All right, this was Frame Game Radio. Mike Benz chose to play in politics. He became a public figure. And Brandy Zadrozny did a solid piece of journalism on him.
Legislation project, and it produced de-radicalization material. It made contact with groups in the early primordial soup of the MAGA movement in 2016 and sought to move people from a place of hate and division closer to a place of love and unity. And it was successful. The biggest fans of this account, which was deleted 6 years ago, and to which I only contributed in a very limited manner, were fellow Jews who saw how effective it was at building a bridge and winning over hearts of people who held anti-Semitic beliefs, and non-Jews who would write in to say, I'm so glad I found this account. I used to have a lot of hate and heaviness in my heart towards Jewish people, but since I discovered you, I don't feel that way anymore. And the biggest antagonists of this account were people complaining their followers were becoming less radical and
Norvin.
less willing. He's all about Norvin there, Dan.
Yeah, Norvin.
Let me be clear, I am extremely proud of this. Basically, I do it again. In another life, this thing I was briefly a part of in 2016 and 2017 would be getting National Science Foundation funds for combating anti-Semitism. And this was achieved through dialogue and engagement instead of shunning and censorship. You can disagree with the methods, but you can't argue with the results. And I won't be lectured by that journalist on what techniques are or aren't effective at moving people from a place of hate and division towards a place of love and unity on the issue of anti-Semitism. So that's his account.
The paragraph, if you could scroll down real quick, the paragraph above his hater. Okay, so and it was successful. So
there's no way that's right. I mean, just to say, like, I don't know when he first appeared on the scene, but like, even if JF eventually shows up, we invited him in message, and he said he might come on, JF Garepi, but he debated on Worski about in-group identity, and then he had a whole series of videos like the Starbucks series. He appeared on JF at least like 5 times, maybe 10 times. He had his own channel. You mentioned the Saul Alinsky. So he did 2 things. He was trying to be some sort of agent to the right, and he was exposing the secrets of the left. So I mean, it's almost completely. There's no way that that he was just happened to be exposing. He was anti-ADL. He was anti-mainstream Jewish organizations, and he was exposing at that time. Like, now things have blown up. It was before George Floyd, and it was right after the Starbucks sit-in with the 2 African Americans that were refused to use the bathroom that he appeared, and it was somewhat new. And his main use why he was popular was because he was exposing these secrets of the left to the far right. So I mean, there's almost no way that his intentions could have been what he has said. Like how would exposing the strategy of the left to far right activists be a method, or if he's just saying he was doing that to gain entry?
Well, I think there's an element.
Does he still agree that it was useful? You say, like, no, it was useful to expose the strategy of the left, and the only people who are willing to listen to me were counter-Semites.
Well, I think there's definitely a pacing and leading element of this where he's listen, here's what I think. The whole Saul Alinsky tactics thing is basically saying whites accept the fact that you're just another interest group, that you're not the cultural center of gravity within the United States, within the West. And basically you blacks, Hispanics, Asians, gays, women, you guys are all going to like compete for Gibbs from us. Well, that's basically like acknowledging, yes, we're in charge. Yes, we're in charge.
Into 2 different aspects. One, he was the most popular in the alt-right for exposing
Jay. It was a Jay exposing Jay.
He also tried to put himself forward as a leader in the right, and that largely failed. I don't think the alt-right really was that interested in his leadership. However, he was extremely popular because he exposed the strategy of the left. So if you're talking like the Saul Alinsky, that stuff that he mentioned, that's not what he was popular for. He was popular.
Well, no, I agree, but his agenda. What I'm saying to you is,
even
like,
on JF,
what was his agenda?
JF never interviewed about his like suggestion of the Saul Alinsky tactics. JF platformed him so that he could expose the strategy of the left. And even like as a Jew, he was kind of like, yeah, I grew up a liberal Jew, and this is what I was taught, and this is what we do, and that's why he had to hide his identity, because he was exposing like somewhat like insider secrets of the Jews.
Sure. Okay. But I agree with you that his popularity is basically the same as your popularity, where it's like, oh, look at this guy with the guy with the what are they called? Sideburns, like talking about how we're just sort of a managerial people, and like, you got to understand where we're coming from. Like, yes, we're in charge. Yes, this is what we think of you, validating like everybody's like preconceptions. So, but Frame Game's position was white. You need to play the identity politics game. And I think for a lot of people on the right, we're not ready to accept this idea that we're going to submit to what is like largely, let's just call it the technocracy, the regime, and the regime is going to like, judge and dole out, government benefits and access to graft to like various interest groups. And, that's what Saul Alinsky basically, he taught minorities how to play that game. How to, use the government.
I mean, you're saying that Frame Games was putting himself.
Frame Games is saying, except, listen, yes, Jews are in charge. I'm quoting Frame Games. Essentially, yes, Jews are the network that is in charge, right? And you have to cope with that reality. And one solution to coping with that reality is just put yourself on the same level as blacks and like vote your own interests. Play our game, the game where like we're in position to essentially be above the fray. And
well, he was putting himself forward to have a leadership position in the alt-right. I mean, he wasn't like, it's like he was reaching
he was the heart right. You remember his thing was the heart right.
He was kind of like the Halsey type position. Like, it's okay to hate left-wing Jews and they're wrong. However, or maybe like Dooovid, he wasn't saying it's okay. Like, okay, like that's how Jews feel.
He was looking for a coalition.
He's saying, I discovered that we're wrong, and now I'm putting myself forward to be leadership on the right.
Yes, yes, I agree with you. There's certainly an element of him trying to build.
And he was in the Trump administration. I mean, saying like,
he was coalition building.
That's like the doxing type. He actually was in the Trump administration.
So Israel is warning Gaza citizens, you stay in Gaza, you die. Where can they go? I mean, I don't believe Egypt will accept them. I mean, how can they even escape Gaza? Educate me. Where exactly can people in Gaza go to escape the horror that is headed their way?
Administration. He actually was on the inside.
Yeah, that's an interesting angle, right? I mean, State Department, that feels like very intelligence community adjacent. You know what I'm saying? Like,
he was
I'm in and out of state. That's like Anderson Cooper in and out of the CIA training program.
He was trying to, like, keep the dissident right, alt-right together within the Republican coalition and put himself forward as leadership for the alt-right. And, if he's just saying, like, it was like a psyop, but I think it's like, no, it's like he put himself forward for leadership in the alt-right, and he was rejected because he was Jewish. And he might have against a handful of people.
He was trying to create he was trying to take that energy, make it kosher so that he could take it mainstream.
So I would say under him, he wanted a leadership.
Sure,
put himself forward,
absolutely.
To Richard Spencer, to all these people, to be like, listen, you need my management, Goy.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of Dooovid frame game parallels.
Well,
only Dooovid was brave enough to show his face.
Well, I was the opposite because I was talking about religion. He was talking politics. I was talking religion, and I wasn't portraying myself to be in a position of leadership. I was portraying myself as an independent scholar, just willing to answer questions.
That's
on
true.
Judaism.
But you guys sort of came at it.
Yeah, I mean, we're similar, but I'm saying he actually was putting himself forward to be in a position of leadership in the alt-right. I was just an independent scholar. I'm still just.
What was it you said? That's what you said in the pre-show?
And he is. I mean, he went on to become a leader in the right. So he already was at that point. That's why he was a non, because he actually was in the Trump administration. He outclasses Dooovid. He went to Ivy League schools. He was in the Trump administration, and now he has 100,000 followers. He has an organization. He is a leader on the right.
You described him as a Jew, revealing the secrets of the Jews.
That's how he described himself.
Right.
Well, I don't think he would ever. I guess that's not something that he would have explicitly articulated. Listen,
It's worth saying to everybody, just in case anybody can't remember, he was openly Jewish to everybody. It's not a revelation now after the fact that he was Jewish.
And he said he knew the stuff about the left because he was part of the left, because he was brought up in that environment. He went to Ivy League schools. He was a lawyer for a human rights institution.
No, he said he was a corporate attorney.
I thought he said he did human rights, but whatever. I'm saying he knew this stuff because he came from the typical leftist background, and then whatever reason came on to be a Republican because he thought the Republicans were right, and he was comparable to Halsey. And we bring it into Halsey because Halsey was the only mod on his channel.
Throwing big
Halsey
bucks
was
around.
a little bit more
Big bucks Halsey.
But I mean, he was basically parallel to
the Halsey question. You know what? Should we get Halsey on? Because Halsey's seen all this on Twitter and is in my DMs with lots of opinions.
He's welcome.
Of course, he says that FDR is obviously
welcome.
He says, I don't think I'm
Halsey's hating
anything private, but I would say that Halsey says the simplest explanation is that Frame Games Radio is an independent actor. Now, I think that's interesting because I think this network of Jew thing. And listen, I want to say, I have watched enough Luke Ford. I have seen his DM groups. I know all these characters. There's a lot I could say about private conversations I had with Frame Game. One time he went on Big Cat Kayla. This was within my first week of going online. Okay. Remember when Big Cat Kayla was a thing? And
yes.
Oh, God, the most cringe, I will always forever hate the term friend after her. But anyway.
Frame Games was streaming to 5, I knew about Frame Games.
Well, but he's on Frame Games goes on there.
I'm just to put it, Frame Games was around when Luke Ford just started. He was streaming to 5 people. He got on Warski, and then he got a little bigger, but even then he was streaming to 10 people. He was small enough that
what I'm saying is,
he wasn't even bigger than you at the time where you talked to him. Besides for JF platforming, he wasn't even bigger than you.
No, he was bigger. He was big enough. He was maybe a 10,000 sub character at that point. But what I'm saying is that I go on Big Cat Kayla because Norvin and Mr. Fahrenheit or whoever is arguing basically about Frame Game because it was a big question what to do about the base Jew or the good Jew, right? That was definitely a debate, right? And so I go on, and I personally really like Frame Game, okay? And I go on Norvin because I saw Norvin as this optics disaster, just in general. So I'm just sort of predisposed to disagree with everything he's got to say. And I'm not saying he's right or wrong, even looking back, but he and I argue about it. Frame Game is sitting there watching that video, and I get DMs. He calls me that night, and we talked for 4 hours about.
Wow.
Oh gosh, dude, it was
This is before
he was basically saying like, I'm here to help Norvin. Like basically like
this was
Norvin
before the
needs my help.
Richard Spencer phone number. I mean, just to put like a time of reference, you're claiming
the first time I talked to Frame Games was like within the first 3 weeks of me appearing on Luke Ford. Because remember, like I was only Luke's co-host for maybe 4 or 5 weeks before my wife found out and I got shut down.
When Frame Games doxed by accident Richard Spencer's phone number and you called Richard Spencer.
That was maybe, this is probably a month preceding that incident, right? Because like when I got Richard's number and I called it, because we never told Richard that we got it from Frame Game. Okay. But when
is Brundle
listen to me.
Was the whole time? Like, I don't care.
No, I get it. No. I didn't know who Frame Game was.
You're saying you were talking to Frame Games on the phone and you didn't know who he was.
I'm saying we were talking like over, it was either Discord. I mean, at the time it was Discord or.
That's not what you just said. You said you talked with him on the phone for 4 hours.
Yeah, no, it was, on my.
Oh, but you're saying
like I talked to him by voice.
You were using
hours.
Google Hangouts on your phone. You didn't have a cell number.
Whatever it was. Like I talked
to him
privately.
I mean, you're talking offline.
I'm saying I talked to him simply by voice and simply as like
offline for 4 hours. Like
immediately following this interaction with Norvin about
okay,
we've got the
timeline sorted out. We've got the timeline
before you started your own channel, like
before
or about the same time you started your own channel.
Like something like that, but like definitely before we made it big. Okay, definitely before we got the phone number. And so like when I reached out to Richard, I didn't reach out to him as like, I didn't disclose that Frame Game had like doxed the number. Okay. And I say to Richard basically, hey, like I'm this alt-right channel and I've had Frame Game Radio. We had Frame Game Radio.
That was live on your stream. Everybody was watching when you.
Right, exactly. And Richard DM'd me and he's like, I'll come on, but can you get Frame Game on? Right. He would come on if I got Frame Game on for a conversation. So Frame Game basically gets word that like we made this phone call to Richard, that it came from his stream. Richard doesn't know. So like Frame Game is like frantically trying to get in touch with me to like shut this down. Like not to let Richard know that that he had doxed his number. And I was like, well, I wouldn't do that. I was like, but also it'd really help my channel if you would come on with Richard. And he really didn't want to do it. I don't really know why. He really didn't want to talk to Richard Spencer. And, you know, God forgive me, like I basically implied that like it would really help me keep it a secret if he came on the show. So that's the word.
You're saying, yeah, you're not making sense. Either keep what a secret? Either you didn't know who he was.
Like I'm saying that, like I guess this is.
You're either saying you knew who he was and you threatened to dox him, or you didn't know.
No. I basically he wanted me. He wanted me to. Oh, here's what it was. He wanted me to take the stream down because it revealed the fact that the docs had come off of Frame Game's video. Like,
okay, so that had nothing to do with you knowing his identity. It was just
it wasn't his identity. It was just like, dude, you got to take that window down. Like, people are gonna think I'm doxed. That's what it was. It wasn't like he cared that Richard.
I remember that. Just the way that you phrased it made it think that like that it was something.
Well, I was basically saying like I would love to take that video down.
The only thing that you held over Frame Games was the fact that you screenshotted Richard's phone number from his screen.
Exactly.
And that's what you held over him.
Right. I was like, I would take that video. I was like, dude, this video is going to be a lot of views for me. If I take it down, you got to give me.
Yeah, I had done like research. Like I did like a presentation in that stream, and you took that down.
Right. So okay. So we get this whole thing set up, and he like, I don't really know why he didn't want to talk to Richard, but he did it, and that was a great stream. We had like 600 live viewers. It was like the fucking peak. Okay, and then it all came crashing down. So.
That's in the meantime while he was on.
But it wasn't until like sometime.
That was already when Frame Games was a regular on JF.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I think like he felt like touching Richard. It was two things. Like one, he didn't want the video out because he felt like it would make him look like a doxer of Richard's phone number. Like that would reduce his credibility with his target audience. And then two.
How did he have Richard's phone number to start with though?
Because him and Richard were DMing and Richard was like, "Here's my number, call me." But like,
okay.
And so like when Frame Game started some stream, he like had his Twitter DM window open in the first 5 seconds and he shut it out immediately. But we had some live viewer who basically hops in and goes, "Hey Brundle, do you want his number?" And I said, "Sure." And he sent it to me and said, "I got this off wherever." And then we called on, and it's all history. But
I remember this. I remember it live.
But yeah, so so Frame Game, like, and Richard, by the way, like, I don't know if you could find it. Richard did tweet like about this situation and basically says like, obviously the guy had an agenda, like, and I can respect that. I think for me, I think it was always that he was trying to kosherize. He was always kosherizing, and he will say, I remember this quote forever. He said, "I'm getting off on the train at a different place." But I think we're like on the same.
I remember him saying that. Yes, yeah.
So like, I don't think he's. Nothing is a revelation about his motivations. I think that the network that the account was like the result of some network, and I'm saying I know that there were these like alt-right Twitter DM groups because Luke Ford like basically showed his Twitter inboxes, and Luke Luke's radical love and inclusion tagline is him and FGR like both had it. Like that's really interesting to me.
I mean, I messaged Luke about this. He saw it, but he didn't message back. I mean, yeah, Luke Ford still has that Richard Spencer line. My tradition teaches a message of radical inclusion and love. Like 6 years later.
Right, and look what FGR is talking about in that post. Like,
okay, the line wasn't from Richard Spencer. The line was from a Reform rabbi talking to Richard Spencer, offering to teach Richard Spencer radical love and inclusion through teaching Richard the teachings of Torah. And Richard Spencer, much more in touch with the Torah tradition than the Reform rabbi, pointed out that Torah is not exactly primarily about radical love and inclusion.
I mean,
Frame Games was that unity, love, and unity. And it's like, I'm not opposed to love and unity.
I think Frame Games was on Luke Ford before me and you were.
Well, you remember when he basically muted us both? Like, FGR's here. Like,
oh, was that the first time he was on where he muted us? Yeah, I was like, Luke Ford, like, completely shut us up.
Well, that was your last appearance for like a year.
I will bounce you if you don't be quiet for Frame Games.
Yeah,
I was like,
no, he was like,
just like, what the hell?
Luke Ford, dude. I mean, he goes, as a right winger, I believe in hierarchy, and when like a higher ranked streamer comes on, the minions from the chat need to shut the fuck up. And like, Dooovid was so offended. Dooovid goes in the comments after that video and is just flaming it. And like, that's basically when him and Luke didn't talk for like probably 18 months after that. It was that stream.
Yeah, I was like, why the hell are you kissing the ass of some non-streamer?
How's that possible? Dude, like, I'm on here showing my face. Like, look at my, like, I'm wearing a helmet. Who is this guy?
Well, yeah, I'm saying like, how could you possibly diss somebody right in front of your face for just like a non-streamer?
Okay.
So, but yeah, that happened.
But I'm saying that,
but I don't know. Like, was that the first time that Frame Games appeared? So
I think
Frame Games appeared on Luke Ford after we were already on.
Yeah, so I still have the same attitude. I'm a right winger. I believe in hierarchy. I don't treat everyone who comes on the stream the same way. Dooovid is different from Brundlefly, different from Mike Benz. I mean, I treat people differently, often depending upon events and circumstances. So I still have that same attitude I had in 2018. Sometimes I want to mute everybody else in a conversation to just hear from one guy. Sometimes I just want to talk to people who say accept evolution.
Well, because the thing was like, what was going on at the time? And this,
I came on.
He was watching. Remember, Luke was obsessed with Worski.
Okay, let me rechange it. Luke Ford was on Worski before JF. Or JF was on. Was JF the...
No, JF went on Worski at the end of 2017. I first went on Worski with JF in late January 2018. Brundlefly, I think, first appeared on my channel around April of 2018. Dooovid shortly thereafter. Frame Game came on my show about 6 times between March and June of 2018, and I believe Frame Game disappeared in the end of June, approximately, of 2018.
The co-host already of Worski when Luke Ford was on?
Yes.
And then Frame Games blows up, I think, after. Frame Games comes on Worski very shortly after, and that's where he burst onto the scene from appearing on Worski, where JF is the co-host. And if JF shows up, like, we asked him the details, but, like, it's possible that JF knew about Frame Games before, and he was the one who recruited Frame Games for the debate, or maybe JF heard about...
Didn't he appear with Halsey? Didn't he appear with Halsey?
I think JF knew about Frame Games, and he's the one who invited him onto Worski for that debate. And then, but we came into some. It's possible JF knew about Frame Games before we did, but we knew, like, after that appearance on Worski, he blew up. He was all over the place.
Yeah, I think he came directly to Luke's show.
I gotta get this guy on my stream. So like, Dooovid was just like the B cast because he couldn't get the guys he wanted. Once Frame Games came on, he was like, I would drop you in a second for Frame Games.
Yeah. Well, dude, I mean, there's the main attraction, and then there's the whack pack filler. I mean, there ain't there's no question.
But I mean, it's like alpha beta, God forbid, like, okay, we're friends, but it's like, I'm only your friend because the people I want to be friends with aren't friends with you, and I would drop you in a second.
Yeah, there's a difference between friendship and streaming. So my priority, overwhelmingly, when I do a live stream, is the quality of the live stream. That's not necessarily the entertainment quality of the live stream or the compelling freak show element of the live stream. There are other values, such as the intellectual caliber of the work. So yeah, there are definitely times I try to mute everybody else for one particular guest, whether that guest was Frame Game Radio or Kevin Michael Grace.
Yeah. Well, so the thing was, though, is okay. So JF is hosting. I mean, Internet Blood Sports, for people who don't remember, was basically you could have debates about things like JQ adjacent topics, race topics on YouTube, with people super chatting the heck out of these things. These live streams were just, and it only lasted like 6 months, and it sort of peaks with Sargon and Spencer, and then we get to a point where Worski and JF, who were co-hosts, split up, and that energy continues.
Guess who else
JF.
was on that show? Babylon.
Yeah, Babs.
You can't make it up.
So yeah, I know. So
weird.
So the thing is like they go, and JF. I just remember like the Halsey Bucks flowing to JF. I don't know if they were like he was there with Worski though. Didn't he debate Nick on Worski and JF? Wasn't he there at that point?
Yes.
Wasn't that both of them?
Halsey was on.
Remember when Nick broke out the knife? Nick the knife.
Halsey might have been on
against Halsey
before even JF was co-host.
Where's that? Yeah, that was Halsey.
But Halsey teams up like after JF goes solo. Halsey like teams up and tries to be his handler, and he's giving a bunch of money. Halsey
he buys access. It's $100 a night.
Games, but I mean, Halsey like buys himself a spot to become a weekly guest, and Frame Games is a weekly guest, and Halsey is a weekly guest on the new spinoff of JF.
So let's discuss the Halsey question now. We keep bringing it up. We've just talked about it tangentially. Halsey English. What the hell was he doing back then? Where did he get that money from? And was he part of this operation?
He has to answer that himself, and we just speculate. But I'm just saying what we know. We know that Halsey know that Halsey gave Luke Ford thousands of dollars, and we know that Halsey possibly gave JF as much as $10,000, maybe not that much. And I mean, JF had a lot of money coming in, a lot of super chats. But when JF first spun off from Worski, Halsey was unquestionably his biggest super chat.
$100 bucks a night,
$50, $100 a night, and JF was like. I don't know if he was kidding. I mean, JF has a little bit more integrity. He wasn't straight up kissing Halsey's ass, but he was bringing Halsey on as like a weekly guest. He liked, I think JF actually liked Frame Games, had useful information. Halsey was more like, okay, he's a big streamer. He's giving me money, but he brought him on. And, I don't know, if Halsey could have been his business decision that he wanted to promote himself as a streamer. So he bought his way in, or it could be some sort of conspiracy. And then the question is, did Halsey and Frame Games actually know each other? And obviously, as I mentioned, I remember me and Halsey were friendly. When Frame Games got hit by the GDL and Halsey was streaming and I appeared in Halsey's chat and Halsey was like, oh, I'm a mod on Frame Games, and he went and like deleted all of the GDL. But as far as I know, like Halsey was the only mod on Frame Games. And when Halsey first started out with like Analytical, I don't even know if it was
Analytical Check, yeah, dude.
But like, Frame Games used to be on Halsey's channel when like Halsey had like 10 viewers.
Okay, so it's funny, by the way. So we see Worski. So we know that Halsey precedes the JF Worski breakup, right? And for those who don't know, Halsey English is basically like the arch. He's like arch dog. Like he wants to go to war with the white nationalists. Like he wants to like grind them into dust. He's like the anti-Semite, like hardcore, max violence, like no quarter given. Okay, so he's like basically every big right winger, like Mike Enoch, Nick Fuentes, Patrick Little, who else? I mean, so on and so on. Like all went to battle against Halsey. Okay, and it was like, and I will say this: Halsey English is this huge villain. And I get it. And like, I know that people that watch this stuff, like care about like the points that are being made. And it feels like it matters, but like 6 years removed from all this, I really wish well to everybody I ever talked to on the internet, even the people that I said nasty things to. You know what I'm saying? Like we had a good time and they were a big part of it. You know what I mean? They were willing participants. So
yeah, I'm just trying to get the chain of events in the history.
So what I would say is Halsey. So let me tell you when I came on the scene.
I'm just like, people might be rooting for different people on the side. And honestly, like I thought me and Halsey were friends. He turned against me in like the last year, and I'm not even sure why that happened. But like, for a period, me and Halsey were even friends, and we're streaming together. He invited me on my channel. He was on his. I'm just giving the history of what happened.
Yeah, okay, right. So, but what I'm saying is,
and I'm asking questions. I'm asking the main question. I'm asking is
where does money come from?
Well, no. I mean, that's also a question, but no. I mean, the main, because we're talking Frame Games. I'm saying, did Halsey know who Frame Games was the same time? If there was some sort of conspiracy, was Halsey and Frame Games in on it together at the time?
All right. So here's what I'll say: is I got invited to Halsey's Discord, like basically within a couple days of like going on the Ford show. Like when I appeared, like basically both like the Jews and the white nationalists like wanted to like wrap their arms around me, right? And I basically looked at it as like I like talking to people. You know what I'm saying? So I talk to everybody, and Halsey used to basically like an analytical chick like made my very first like banner art, and Halsey like offered to pay for like a guy to like do logos and all kinds of shit for me, and
no, you don't know. He's like
Brundlefly took a principled stand and he refused to take any donations from Halsey.
Like that you were
what I'm saying is like let's
controlled opposition of Halsey and Frame Games the whole time, and now you're just doing it. No, I don't know. Like no, I don't know that Halsey behind
what I'm saying to you
was your handler. So
okay,
like I don't care. I'm not changing my opinion, but it sounds like
he would do stuff like he would like introduce me to like Ethan Ralph and JF. Like he facilitated JF coming on our show. He's like, oh, I'll get Frame Game on your show. Like Halsey certainly was wrapping his arms around me, right? Halsey absolutely tried to wrap his arms. Now, why did I end up falling out of Discord?
The streamer trying to build his platform. He saw like Luke Ford.
Sure, well, I don't. Yeah, like he's schmoozing. I don't know.
He also cost me money and help and booking.
Right.
So a lot of people, I was like that too. Like, I mean, Halsey might have had more connections. Luke Ford, he's saying that's just normal. Like everyone in the business was doing that at the time.
Yeah, I think that there's a huge.
So Ricardo is like a 10 out of 10 as far as extrovert. Halsey pretty close to a 10 out of 10 as far as extrovert. I think I'm like a 5 out of 10, and I think Doovid's probably like a 2 out of 10 when it comes to extroversion.
Definitely.
No, everybody was trying to build their streaming platform because at the time it was a boatload of money. Like Luke Ford, JF, Halsey, like they saw those.
YouTube was still going strong. Like people hadn't been completely wrong.
Yeah, saying like I'm saying Worski and JF were making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. They were making thousands of dollars on a stream, and Halsey and Luke Ford saw that money and they wanted a piece of it. And so it was just normal business. They were working together, trying to build up a network and news, and they wanted a piece of that money and influence. And like Frame Games,
yeah, there were many months there I made well over $1,000 a month. Bought an portable air conditioner for my studio here. I think spent $400 or so. Really came from Halsey's super chats.
Maybe wasn't like Frame Games was not trying to get in on the money and influence.
I think to Steven's point, like he definitely spent more than he made. Now, did he really have aspirations of a little media empire? Would $50,000 be reasonable startup costs on something? Maybe it was his money. But like also, like what's Frame Game talking about with his network of people? What's that about?
It wouldn't shock me if that was Halsey's money. In fact, I would say I would lean 60% Halsey's money, 70% Halsey's money, 30% money from another source channeled through Halsey.
A big thing.
What did Frame Games know Trump? I mean, we don't know this. Like, I don't know.
By the way, Frame Games was in that Discord, but Frame Games didn't really participate.
But what's Frame Games like? How well was he connected in the Trump administration? And is the purpose of this dox now to like, oh, look at this guy who helped out Trump, and now that Trump's coming back, that's the reason he's getting doxxed because Frame Games was in the Trump administration.
I mean, it would make sense to me that
and that's like, okay, Richard Spencer got pushed out of the Trump administration. Like, my Frame Games was an Ivy League lawyer. I don't know his details. I didn't look into who he is or what he did, but I mean, it sounds like he's saying himself he was in fact in the Trump administration.
By the way, and I also find like his little statement about like
he
says, I'm extremely proud of this. In another life, this thing I would be part of would be getting National Science Foundation funds.
Brundle,
so, like, it's interesting that he thinks there should be money.
You said you used to have a friend that you spoke to like half an hour every day that lied to you and said he was in the Trump administration. Then, like, after you spoke to him for a few months, all of a sudden he's like, oh, by the way, I just lied and I have no connection to Trump. I'm just some dude on my phone. But you're saying Frame Games was opposite.
That was my childhood best friend.
Frame Games was actually in the Trump administration.
No, I think it just points to, like, I mean, there's a lot of conjecture here. I mean, a lot of it impossible to prove. But, like, for you and I and Steven, who were, like, there at the time, I have to say that this like, I come onto the internet, and Steven, I'm sure you can agree, and Dooovid too. Like, I came on as an independent scholar, okay? Like, I was just interested, and I just wanted to talk to people because I can't talk to people in my real life about this stuff.
Okay, come on, guys. Scholars produce, unearth, documents. It's not just something that anyone can call themselves an independent scholar, but yeah, you're independent thinker.
And like, yeah, do I have a political viewpoint that I would like to see around the world? But like, I wasn't conspiring, and there wasn't any fucking money behind it. You know what I'm saying? And I don't work in the federal government. You know what I mean? Involved,
Yeah, but you were working. I'm saying, okay, like, and you saw that money coming in. You were like, okay, like, but you said, like, okay, you had a job and you have a high IQ and your wife and your business. You're like, dude, I could make over $100,000 a year. You already were easily working in business. I'm not quitting my job to become a streamer, even though you saw the money. And Halsey also, like, he had his own money, his own business. But Halsey, whatever reason, he wanted to create his own news service. And like Luke Ford, maybe he needed the money, so he was just like, wow, if I could become rich or make a living doing what I love doing, streaming. But there was an overlay between like JF, like the guys who were trying to become professional, and the people who were guest and content. So like I was like, okay, if I can make some money, I monetize my channel. But like I never planned on. I just wanted to get my voice out there, have some interesting conversations, meet some people. I didn't never planned on moving professional. But
this
it was natural to see there were a lot of people.
Was an insider.
There were a lot of people.
He was an insider running an op, and now he's like got some new op where it's like.
I don't think he was running an op. He was talking about what he believed every living thing tries to change the environment around it to make it most conducive for the thriving of its own people. So yes, Colin Liddell puts it in the chat, and Dooovid put it in the chat earlier that Richard Spencer doxed Frame Game in 2018 as Mike Benz, but not many people paid attention. Elliot Blatt makes the profound point that our true scholars, our true independent scholars, roam the streets of Oakland.